I was halfway through my morning coffee when I noticed 3 pickup trucks backing up to my heated barn like they owned the place. And that was the exact moment I knew the HOA had crossed a line they wouldn't be able to uncross. My name is Lucas Sheffield, and I had been living on my 5-acre property just outside of Bend, Oregon for the past 8 years. The property came with a beautiful heated barn that I had renovated myself, spending nearly $40,000 to turn it into a climate-controlled workshop and storage space. The barn sat far back on my lot, surrounded by Douglas firs and positioned in a way that made it barely visible from the main road. It was my sanctuary, my project space, and most importantly, it was mine at least. That's what I thought until the Hidden Valley Estates HOA decided otherwise. I put down my coffee mug and walked outside, the crisp November air hitting my face as I approached the trucks. 3 men I didn't recognize were already unloading what looked like patio furniture, boxes, and various outdoor equipment. Leading them was a woman I recognized immediately as Patricia Hartwell, the HOA president, clipboard in hand like it was some kind of royal scepter. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice carrying across the gravel driveway. "What exactly is going on here?" Patricia turned to face me with that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was in her late 40s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of outfit that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager," even when she was standing on someone else's property. "Good morning, Lucas," she said cheerfully, as if this was a perfectly normal situation. "I tried calling you yesterday, but it went to voicemail. We're just using the community barn for winter storage. Several residents need a climate-controlled space for their outdoor furniture and equipment, and since the barn is a community amenity, we've scheduled rotations for storage use." I stared at her, genuinely confused. "Community barn? Patricia, this is my barn. It's on my property." She shook her head, that condescending smile still plastered on her face. "Actually, Lucas, if you check the community map filed with the HOA documents, you'll see that the barn is designated as a shared amenity for Hidden Valley Estates. It's been listed that way since the development was established 12 years ago. That's impossible. I bought this property 8 years ago and the barn was included in my deed. I renovated it with my own money." Patricia tapped her clipboard. "The HOA has all the documentation. The barn is positioned on what we call the community easement zone. Yes, you may have done renovations, but the structure itself is for community use. It's all in the bylaws, section 47, paragraph 12. I felt my jaw tighten. I've read the bylaws front to back. There's nothing about my barn being community property. "Well, clearly you missed something," she said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a schedule to keep. These gentlemen are being paid by the hour, and the other residents are waiting for their storage assignments." One of the workers, a younger guy with a bandana tied around his head, looked uncomfortable. "Hey, madam, if there's a property dispute, maybe we should hold off until it's resolved." Patricia whipped her head toward him. "There's no dispute. I have the authority from the HOA board to utilize all community amenities as needed. Continue unloading." I stepped in front of the barn entrance. "Nobody is unloading anything until I see this supposed documentation." "Patricia, I'm telling you right now, this barn is on my property. I have the deed. I have the tax records showing I pay property tax on every square foot including this barn, and I sure as hell didn't consent to the HOA using it for anything." Her face flushed red, and for a moment, the pleasant facade dropped completely. "Mr. Sheffield, you are in violation of HOA cooperation standards. If you continue to obstruct authorized HOA activities, I will have no choice but to fine you $1,000 per day until compliance is achieved. You're going to fine me for not letting you trespass on my property. It's not trespassing when it's community property, she shot back. And I suggest you move aside before I call the police for interfering with HOA business. I pulled out my phone. You know what? Great idea. Let's call the police. I'd love to have an officer explain property rights to you. Patricia's expression shifted to uncertainty for just a moment before she recovered. Fine. Call them. You'll see I'm right, and then you'll owe the HOA an apology along with the fines. I dialed the non-emergency line for the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office and explained the situation. The dispatcher said they'd send a deputy out to mediate the dispute. In the meantime, I told the workers they were welcome to wait, but nothing was going into my barn until this was sorted out. The workers, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation, moved their trucks to the side and waited. Patricia stayed too, constantly checking her phone and making calls to what I assumed were other board members. Deputy James Morrison arrived about 30 minutes later. He was in his early 30s, with the calm demeanor of someone who had dealt with plenty of property disputes in his career. I explained the situation while Patricia kept trying to interrupt with her version of events. "Madam, please let him finish," Deputy Morrison said patiently. "You'll get your turn." I showed him my deed, which clearly indicated that my property extended well past where the barn was located. Patricia produced a map from her clipboard that supposedly showed the barn in some kind of easement zone. The map looked official, with the Hidden Valley Estates logo and what appeared to be a surveyor's stamp. Deputy Morrison examined both documents carefully. "Mr. Sheffield, do you have a recent property survey?" "I have the one from when I bought the property 8 years ago," I said. "It's inside. I can grab it. Please do." I jogged back to the house, my mind racing. I knew the barn was on my property. I had walked the property lines with the previous owner before purchasing. The barn had been a major selling point. The property was slightly more expensive because of it. There was no way this was community property. I found the survey in my file cabinet and brought it back outside. Deputy Morrison spread it across the hood of his patrol car, comparing it to Patricia's map. He frowned, measuring distances with his fingers. "Mrs. Hartwell, this survey clearly shows the barn approximately 40 feet inside Mr. Sheffield's property line. Your map shows it right on the line." "Do you have a survey to back up your map?" Patricia's confident expression faltered. "This map was created by the HOA development company when the neighborhood was established. It's been accepted by the county." "That may be, but surveys are legal documents. If Mr. Sheffield has a certified survey showing the barn on his property, and he has a deed that includes all structures on his land, then legally, this is his barn." Deputy Morrison handed both documents back. "I'm not seeing any easement designation on the official survey either." "This is ridiculous," Patricia snapped. "The HOA has used this barn as a reference point for community planning for years. The previous owners never objected." I turned to her, suddenly very interested. "The previous owners never used it because they moved to Arizona for health reasons. The barn sat empty for 2 years before I bought the place. You probably didn't even notice when I started renovating it because I did most of the work myself on weekends." Deputy Morrison closed his notepad. "Mrs. Hartwell, based on the documentation present, this appears to be Mr. Sheffield's private property. I'm going to have to ask you and your workers to leave. If you believe you have a legitimate claim to use this property, you'll need to pursue it through proper legal channels, not by simply taking possession." Patricia's face had gone from red to almost purple. "This is not over. The HOA board will be filing a formal complaint." Mr. Sheffield, you can expect to receive documentation of fines for non-cooperation, obstruction of community services, and creating a hostile environment within the neighborhood. You do what you need to do, I said, keeping my voice level. But until you have a court order or actual proof that you have any right to this barn, stay off my property. She turned sharply and marched back to her car, yanking out her phone before she even reached it. The workers followed, apologizing quietly as they left. One of them, the younger guy with the bandana, paused by me. "Hey man, for what it's worth, we were just hired for a moving job. We didn't know there was a dispute. Good luck with all this." "Thanks," I said. "Not your fault." After everyone left, Deputy Morrison gave me his card. "Mr. Sheffield, I'd recommend you get an updated survey done as soon as possible. If this HOA is as persistent as they seem, you're going to want ironclad documentation. Also, consider putting up some no trespassing signs and maybe a camera or two pointing at the barn." "I was thinking the same thing," I said. "Thanks for coming out. Just doing my job. Have a good day and keep that survey safe." As I watched him drive away, I felt the weight of what had just happened settling on my shoulders. I had heard stories about HOAs being nightmares, but I had never had serious problems with Hidden Valley Estates before. Sure, Patricia was always sending sternly worded letters about lawn height or holiday decorations being up too long, but nothing like this. This was different. This was a blatant attempt to take my property. I spent the rest of the day installing security cameras around the barn. I set up 4 cameras with night vision and motion detection, all connected to cloud storage. I also printed several no trespassing signs and posted them around the barn and along the property line nearest to it. That evening, I called my friend Derek Chen, who was a real estate attorney in Portland. We had gone to college together, and while we didn't see each other often, we stayed in touch. I explained the situation, and he listened without interrupting. "Lucas, this is either a massive misunderstanding or something more concerning. HOAs can't just claim private property, even if they believe there was some original easement. The survey and your deed are what matter. But I'm curious about this map she showed the deputy. Can you get a copy of it? I could probably request it through the HOA. They're required to make certain documents available to homeowners. Do that. Send me a copy of your survey too and your deed. I want to look at the language. Also, start documenting everything. Every interaction with the HOA, every letter, every fine they try to levy. Everything." "You think this is going to get worse?" Derek was quiet for a moment. "I think if an HOA president shows up with workers to take possession of a building on your property without even confirming ownership first, she's either incredibly incompetent or incredibly bold. Either way, yes, I think this could get worse before it gets better." He was right. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the Hidden Valley Estates HOA. Inside was a formal notice of fines totaling $5,000. The breakdown was absurd. $1,000 for obstruction of community services, $2,000 for creating a hostile environment within the neighborhood, $1,000 for failure to cooperate with HOA-authorized activities, and $1,000 for unauthorized security installations. The cameras, without HOA architectural approval. There was also a demand letter stating that I needed to remove all security cameras, remove all no trespassing signs, and provide full access to the barn for community use within 7 days, or the fines would increase to $1,000 per day. I scanned everything and sent it to Derek, then sat down to draft a response. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew enough to know I needed to object formally and in writing. I wrote a detailed letter explaining that the barn was legally my property, that the fines were without merit, and that I would not be providing access to my private property for HOA use. I also requested copies of any surveys or legal documents the HOA possessed that they believed gave them rights to my barn. I sent the letter via certified mail and email to ensure there was a record. Derek called me that evening after reviewing everything. "Lucas, this is harassment. These fines are completely fabricated. They have no legal basis for charging you for creating a hostile environment or failure to cooperate when you're simply protecting your own property. And the fine for the security cameras is laughable unless you signed some agreement specifically about exterior modifications, and even then, security cameras on your own building would likely be exempt. So what do I do? First, don't pay these fines. Paying them could be seen as an admission that they're valid. Second, I'm going to draft a formal response on letterhead from my firm. Sometimes when HOAs see that a homeowner has retained legal counsel, they back off. Third, we need to get that updated survey done. I'm going to recommend a surveyor I've worked with before. He's thorough and his reports hold up in court. You think this is going to court? I think we need to be prepared for that possibility. Also, I want to do some research on this HOA and the development company that originally built Hidden Valley Estates. Something about this feels off. The surveyor, a man named Robert Kim, came out 3 days later. He was in his 60s, with weathered hands and the precise manner of someone who had spent a lifetime measuring things down to the inch. He spent most of the day walking my property with his equipment, taking measurements, checking against county records, and examining the barn itself. When he finished, he came to the house to give me his initial findings. "Mr. Sheffield, I can tell you right now without question that this barn is on your property. It's not on a property line. It's not in any easement that I can find record of, and it's approximately 40 feet from your eastern property line. To be exact, 42 feet and 7 inches from the nearest boundary marker to the barn's eastern wall." 42 feet, I repeated. So there's no way anyone could reasonably think it's community property. None whatsoever. I also pulled the original development plans for Hidden Valley Estates. The barn isn't even mentioned in those plans. It was built before the development existed. This land was originally part of a larger parcel that was subdivided. The barn appears to have been constructed around 1985, based on the architectural style and materials. The development wasn't established until 2013. This was new information. So the barn was here first, correct? When the original large parcel was subdivided to create Hidden Valley Estates, your 5-acre lot was carved out with the barn already on it. The barn was specifically included in the lot designation. I can't see any scenario where it would be considered community property. Can you put all of this in a report? Already doing it. You'll have a full certified survey report within a week. I'll include the historical research as well. If this goes to any kind of legal proceeding, this report will make it very clear where the property lines are. I thanked him and paid for his services. It wasn't cheap, but it was worth every penny for the peace of mind and the documentation. That evening, I decided to do some of my own research. I started looking into Hidden Valley Estates HOA and its board members. Patricia Hartwell had been president for 6 years. Before that, she had been on the board for another 3 years. She seemed to run the HOA like her personal fiefdom, based on posts I found in neighborhood social media groups. I also found something interesting. About 4 years ago, there had been a dispute between the HOA and another homeowner over a fence placement. The HOA had claimed the fence was on community property. That homeowner had fought back, gotten a survey, and proven the fence was on their private property. The HOA had backed down, but only after trying to levy thousands in fines. It seemed Patricia had a pattern of overreaching. I joined the Hidden Valley Estates Facebook group and posted a carefully worded message asking if anyone else had experienced property disputes with the HOA. Within an hour, I had a dozen responses. Most were people complaining about excessive fines or arbitrary rule enforcement, but 3 people mentioned disputes over property boundaries. One of those was Gerald Martinez, the homeowner from the fence dispute. Gerald sent me a private message and we agreed to meet for coffee the next day. We met at a local coffee shop in Bend, and Gerald turned out to be a retired civil engineer in his early 60s. He was friendly but clearly still frustrated about his experience with the HOA. "Lucas, let me tell you, Patricia Hartwell is either delusional or deliberately dishonest when it comes to property boundaries. 4 years ago, she tried to tell me that my fence was blocking a community walking path that supposedly ran through my backyard. She had this map, just like you described, showing a dotted line going right through my property. What happened? I got a survey which cost me $3,000, and it showed definitively that there was no easement, no walking path designation, nothing. The community walking path was entirely fictional, or she had misread some old planning document. I threatened to sue, and suddenly the HOA dropped it, but not before they fined me $8,000 that I refused to pay. Did they try to collect? They threatened to put a lien on my house. I had my lawyer send them a letter explaining that the fines were fraudulent and that if they attempted to place a lien, I would sue for harassment and abusive process. They backed off. So she's done this before. Gerald nodded. And I'm not the only one. Talk to Sandra Wilson. She lives over on Cedar Creek Drive. Patricia tried to claim that Sandra's shed was actually on HOA land and demanded she either remove it or pay monthly rental fees to the HOA. Same pattern, made-up map, fake documentation. Sandra fought it and won. I thanked Gerald for the information and left the coffee shop with a much clearer picture of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Patricia Hartwell had a history of trying to claim homeowners' property for HOA use, and she used intimidation and fines to bully people into compliance. But I wasn't going to comply. The following week, I received Robert Kim's official survey report. It was comprehensive, professionally formatted, and included photographs, measurements, historical research, and a clear map showing my property lines. The barn was indisputably on my property, 42 feet and 7 inches from the eastern boundary line. I sent copies to Derek and to the HOA via certified mail, along with another letter demanding they rescind all fines and cease any claims to my barn. The response came faster than I expected, but not from Patricia. Instead, I received a letter from the HOA's attorney, a man named Richard Fleming from a firm in Bend. The letter was more professional in tone, but still insisted that the HOA had legitimate claim to utilize the barn based on historical community usage patterns, and implied easement through continuous use. Derek laughed when I read him the letter over the phone. Implied easement through continuous use. They're grasping at straws. That doctrine requires open, notorious, continuous, and hostile use for a specific statutory period. From what you've told me, the barn sat empty for years, and before that, there's no evidence anyone but the property owners used it. This is absurd. So what's the next step? I'm going to respond to their attorney directly. We'll lay out the facts, provide the survey, and make it clear that any continued harassment will result in a lawsuit for abuse of process and trespass. Sometimes when HOA attorneys realize they are on shaky legal ground, they advise their clients to back off. But Patricia Hartwell wasn't the type to back off. 3 days after Derek sent his response, I woke up at 3 in the morning to motion alerts from my barn cameras. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the live feed. 2 figures were moving around the barn, trying the doors. I couldn't see their faces clearly in the infrared, but they were definitely trying to get inside. I called 911 immediately and reported a burglary in progress, then threw on clothes and headed outside with a flashlight. I stayed at a safe distance, but made sure to make noise so they knew someone was coming. By the time I got close to the barn, they were running toward the tree line at the edge of my property. I didn't chase them. Instead, I waited for the sheriff's deputies to arrive, which only took about 10 minutes. Deputy Morrison was on shift again, and he recognized me immediately. "Mr. Sheffield, back so soon." "I've got video," I said, pulling up the footage on my phone. 2 people trying to break into my barn at 3 in the morning. We watched the footage together. The 2 figures were clearly visible, and while their faces weren't perfectly clear, the video was good enough to show their builds and clothing. Deputy Morrison asked me to send him the video file. "Do you have any idea who might want to break into your barn? Is there valuable equipment in there?" "I have tools and some woodworking equipment, but honestly, I think this is related to the HOA dispute I told you about last week. The HOA president has been claiming my barn is community property." Deputy Morrison's expression darkened. "You think the HOA sent people to break into your barn?" "I don't know, but the timing is suspicious. I just had a survey done proving the barn is on my property, and I've been getting threatening letters from the HOA about fines. Now suddenly someone tries to break in. We'll investigate. I'm going to file this report and have our detective follow up. In the meantime, I'd recommend staying alert. If these cameras catch anyone again, call immediately. Don't confront them yourself." I agreed and went back inside, but I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I kept watching the camera feeds, half expecting them to come back. The next morning, I called Derek and told him what happened. He was furious. "Lucas, if the HOA is behind this, they've crossed from civil harassment into criminal activity. Breaking and entering, attempted burglary, this is serious. I don't have proof it was them. Not yet, but you have a pattern of behavior. Document this incident with the police report. I'm going to file a formal complaint with the county about the HOA's conduct. We might also want to consider getting a restraining order against Patricia Hartwell, specifically if this continues." 2 days later, I got a call from Detective Sarah Warner with the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office. She wanted to come by and discuss the attempted break-in. We met at my house, and I showed her all the video footage from that night and previous footage showing Patricia and the workers trying to access the barn. Detective Warner was thorough, taking notes and asking detailed questions about my dispute with the HOA. I gave her copies of all the letters, the survey, and the documentation of fines. "Mr. Sheffield, I'm going to be honest with you. Proving who those 2 people were from this video is going to be difficult unless they try again and we catch them, or unless someone talks. But the pattern you're showing me is concerning. The HOA's behavior leading up to this incident could be considered harassment. What can I do?" "Keep documenting everything. Keep your cameras running. If anyone from the HOA contacts you, document it. If they trespass again, call immediately. We're going to increase patrols in this area, especially at night. I'll also have a conversation with this Patricia Hartwell and let her know we're aware of the situation. Do you think that will help or make things worse?" Detective Warner gave me a slight smile. "In my experience, when people know law enforcement is watching, They either back off or they get sloppy. Either way works for us." True to her word, Detective Warner visited Patricia Hartwell the next day. I know this because Patricia called me directly that evening, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare you send the police to my home? You've accused me of criminal activity. This is slander, Mr. Sheffield. The HOA board is meeting tomorrow night, and we're voting to pursue maximum legal action against you. Patricia, someone tried to break into my barn 2 nights ago. The police are investigating. I never accused you of anything. I simply provided them with information about our ongoing dispute. You're trying to intimidate me and the board. This is harassment." I almost laughed at the irony. "Patricia, you showed up with workers to take possession of my barn without permission. You've sent me letters demanding thousands of dollars in fake fines. You've had your lawyer send threatening letters. And now someone tries to break into the same barn you've been claiming rights to. The police are doing their job. The board will hear about this," she snapped and hung up. The next evening, I received an email notification about an emergency HOA board meeting. Normally, these were closed to general members, but someone on the board must have disagreed with that decision because the email included a Zoom link for homeowners to observe. I logged in at 7 o'clock to watch. The board consisted of 5 members. Patricia Hartwell as president, Margaret Kowalski as vice president, Thomas Chen as treasurer, Sandra Wilson, the same Sandra who had her own dispute with Patricia, and David Park as secretary. The meeting started with Patricia explaining that they needed to discuss the Sheffield situation and determine next steps. Margaret, a woman in her 50s with silver hair, spoke first. "Patricia, I've reviewed the survey that Lucas Sheffield provided. The barn is clearly on his property. I don't understand why we're continuing this fight." "The survey is new," Patricia said sharply. "Our community map has been accepted for years. We have a right to use community amenities." Sandra Wilson, who I now recognized from Gerald's description, shook her head. "Patricia, this is exactly like what you tried to do with my shed and Gerald's fence. You keep trying to claim private property as HOA property, and you keep being wrong. This is costing the HOA money in legal fees, and it's creating hostility in the neighborhood." "I'm protecting community interests," Patricia insisted. Thomas Chen, the treasurer, pulled up some papers. "Speaking of legal fees, we've spent $18,000 in the past month on the Fleming firm for this barn dispute. That's $18,000 from HOA dues that could have gone to actual community maintenance. It's an investment in protecting community assets," Patricia argued. "It's not a community asset," Sandra said, her voice rising. "Lucas Sheffield owns that barn. He has a deed. He pays property tax on it. He renovated it with his own money. What possible justification do we have for claiming it?" Patricia's face was flushed on the video screen. "The barn sits in a location that makes it ideal for community use. The original development plans intended for that area to be a community resource." "Show me those plans," Sandra demanded. "Show me any document that designates that barn as anything other than private property." There was a long pause. Patricia shuffled papers off screen. "The original documents from the development company clearly show—" "Patricia, I've read those documents," Thomas interrupted. "That barn isn't mentioned anywhere. The land it sits on was part of a pre-existing parcel that was included in Lucas Sheffield's lot when the development was created. You're making this up." The meeting devolved into argument. Margaret and Sandra both called for the HOA to drop all claims against my property and rescind the fines. Thomas agreed. David Park, who had been quiet, finally spoke up and said he also thought they should back off. That was 4 against 1. Patricia refused to accept the vote. She insisted that, as president, she had the authority to pursue legal action in defense of community interests. Sandra pointed out that the bylaws required board approval for legal expenditures over $5,000. Margaret made a formal motion to terminate the HOA's legal action against me and to fire Richard Fleming's firm. The motion passed 4-1. I watched Patricia's face on the screen as the vote went against her. She looked like she wanted to throw her computer. Instead, she said in a tight voice, "This meeting is adjourned," and disconnected. The next morning, I received an email from Sandra Wilson asking if we could meet. We met at the same coffee shop where I had met with Gerald. Sandra was in her early 50s, with short brown hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Lucas, I want to apologize on behalf of the board. Well, most of the board. Last night's meeting should have happened weeks ago. Patricia has been making decisions without full board approval, and we didn't realize how far she had taken this situation until you provided that survey." "I appreciate that," I said, "but Patricia doesn't seem like she's going to let this go." Sandra sighed. "You're right. She called me at midnight last night, ranting about betrayal and saying she's going to continue fighting this personally. I think she's lost touch with reality on this issue. She's become obsessed with the idea that she has the right to control everything in the neighborhood. What happens now?" "The board voted to rescind all fines against you and to drop any legal claims. We've sent notice to the Fleming firm terminating their services related to your property. However, Patricia is still the HOA president, and she can make our lives difficult if she wants to. Several of us are discussing calling for a vote to remove her from the board, but that requires a petition signed by 30% of homeowners and then a special election. It's a process. In the meantime, watch your back, document everything. And if she tries anything else, let me know immediately. There are board members who will support you." I thanked Sandra for her honesty and left feeling slightly better about the situation, but still uneasy. Patricia Hartwell had proven herself to be relentless, and I doubted she would just accept the board's decision. I was right to be worried. 3 days later, I was working in the barn on a Saturday afternoon, building a bookshelf for my living room when I heard vehicles pulling up outside. I walked to the barn door and saw Patricia's Mercedes SUV, along with 2 other cars I didn't recognize. Patricia got out, followed by 4 other people, 2 men and 2 women I had never seen before. I stepped outside. "Patricia, what are you doing here?" "I'm conducting an HOA property inspection," she said, holding up her clipboard like a shield. "These are licensed property inspectors. We're here to examine the barn for code violations. You don't have permission to be on my property, and you certainly don't have permission to inspect my barn. As HOA president, I have the authority to conduct inspections of all structures within Hidden Valley Estates to ensure they meet community standards." One of the men with her, wearing a polo shirt with an inspection company logo, looked uncomfortable. "Madam, I was told this was a routine HOA inspection of a community building. If there's a property dispute, we shouldn't be here." "There's no dispute," Patricia said quickly. "This gentleman is just confused about his property boundaries. Please proceed with the inspection." I pulled out my phone and called Derek. He answered on the second ring and I explained the situation. He asked to speak to Patricia. I put him on speaker. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Derek Chen, attorney for Lucas Sheffield. You are currently trespassing on private property. Mr. Sheffield has not consented to any inspection. If you and your associates do not leave immediately, we will pursue charges for criminal trespass." "This is ridiculous," Patricia said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. I'm acting in my capacity as HOA president. Your HOA board voted to drop all claims to this property. I have the meeting minutes. You have no authority to be here. Leave now, or I'm advising my client to call the sheriff's office. The inspection crew was already walking back to their vehicles. The man in the polo shirt called back, "We're leaving. We don't get involved in property disputes. Madam, you need to sort this out before calling us again." Patricia stood her ground for another moment, her face red, before finally spinning around and marching back to her car. She pointed at me as she got in. "This isn't over, Mr. Sheffield. Not by a long shot." As soon as they left, I called Detective Warner and reported the trespass. She said she would document it and have another conversation with Patricia. That evening, Derek called me back. "Lucas, I think it's time to go on the offensive. Patricia Hartwell is harassing you and it's escalating. I want to file a civil suit against her personally and against the HOA for harassment, abuse of process, and trespass. We'll seek an injunction prohibiting her from coming onto your property or contacting you directly." "Will that work?" "It'll send a message. And if she violates the injunction, she can be held in contempt of court. But there's something else I want to look into. I've been researching Hidden Valley Estates and Patricia Hartwell, and I found something interesting." "What?" "Patricia's husband, Brian Hartwell, owns a property management company. That company has been trying to get a contract with Hidden Valley Estates to manage community amenities. One of the services they pitch is climate-controlled storage rental. If your barn could be classified as an HOA amenity, her husband's company could potentially manage it and charge residents for storage space." My stomach dropped. So this whole thing might be about creating a business opportunity. "I'm not sure yet, but it's suspicious. If Patricia has been trying to claim private property as HOA property to benefit her husband's business, that's a serious conflict of interest and potentially fraud. How do we prove that? We start by deposing her and looking at HOA financial records. If she's been steering HOA business toward her husband's company, there will be a paper trail. But first, let's get that injunction in place." Derek filed the lawsuit and injunction request the following week. The court date was set for 3 weeks out, which felt like an eternity. In the meantime, I had to deal with the constant stress of wondering what Patricia would try next. I didn't have to wait long. 5 days after the lawsuit was filed, I came home from work to find a notice posted on my front door. It was from the City of Bend Code Enforcement Office, stating that multiple complaints had been received about unpermitted structures on my property, and that an inspector would be coming out within the next week to investigate. I called the number on the notice and spoke with a code enforcement officer named Michael Torres. He was professional and patient as I explained that I believed the complaints were harassment related to an HOA dispute. "Mr. Sheffield, I understand, but we have to investigate all complaints we receive. Someone reported that you have unpermitted additions to your barn and that there may be electrical work done without proper permits. Do you have permits for any renovations you did?" My heart sank. When I had renovated the barn 8 years ago, I had done a lot of the work myself to save money. I had pulled permits for the major electrical work and the heating system, but some of the interior renovations I had done without permits, not realizing I needed them for what I considered minor modifications. "I have some permits," I said carefully, "but not for everything. I didn't know I needed permits for interior walls and insulation." "Okay, well, that's what we need to look at. I'll be out on Tuesday at 10 a.m. if that works for you." I agreed and immediately called Derek. He listened to my explanation and asked me to dig out whatever permits I did have. "Lucas, code enforcement issues can be fixed. If you did some work without permits, You'll likely have to pay some fines and get things inspected and approved retroactively. It's a hassle, but it's not the end of the world. What concerns me is that someone is clearly weaponizing the code enforcement process against you. You think it's Patricia. Who else? She can't access your barn legally, so now she's trying to create problems through the city. It's another form of harassment. Michael Torres came out on Tuesday as scheduled. He was in his mid-40s, with a tablet for taking notes and a measuring tape on his belt. He was professional but thorough, examining the barn from top to bottom. I showed him the permits I had for the electrical and heating work, which satisfied those concerns. However, he noted several interior walls and the insulation as unpermitted work. He also found that one of my workbenches was built in a way that technically violated setback requirements from an electrical panel, which I hadn't known was a rule. Mr. Sheffield, I'm going to need you to submit retroactive permit applications for the interior renovation work. The good news is that, from what I can see, the work is actually well done. You'll need to have it inspected, but I don't think you'll have problems getting it approved. The workbench near the electrical panel will need to be moved. That's a safety issue. Overall, this isn't terrible, but it will cost you some money in permit fees and inspection fees. Can I ask who filed the complaints? Michael checked his tablet. The complaints were submitted anonymously through our online portal. We get a lot of anonymous complaints, but we still have to investigate them. Of course they were anonymous, but I knew who was behind them. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked on getting the retroactive permits submitted and scheduling inspections. It cost me about $3,000 in fees and another few hundred to hire an electrician to inspect and certify the electrical work I had done. The workbench had to be moved 6 feet, which was annoying but doable. Through all of this, the court date for the injunction was approaching. Derek had been gathering evidence and taking depositions. He deposed Patricia, Margaret, and Sandra from the HOA board. Patricia's deposition, according to Derek, was a disaster for her case. Lucas, she couldn't keep her story straight. She claimed the barn was always meant to be community property, but she couldn't provide any documentation. She insisted she had authority to act unilaterally as HOA president, even when confronted with the board meeting minutes showing they voted against her. And when I asked about her husband's property management company, she became extremely defensive. Did you find a connection? We're still digging, but we found evidence that she's been pushing the board to hire her husband's company for various services over the past 2 years. So far, it looks like the board has rejected most of those proposals, which might explain why she's acting unilaterally. She can't get board approval, so she just does what she wants. The injunction hearing was held on a Thursday morning in early December at the Deschutes County Courthouse. I sat next to Derek at the plaintiff's table while Patricia sat across the aisle with a new attorney, a woman named Jennifer Ross who specialized in HOA law. The judge was Elizabeth Carver, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for being fair but firm. Derek presented our case systematically. He showed the survey proving the barn was on my property, the documented pattern of harassment by Patricia, the trespassing incidents, the false fines, and the anonymous code enforcement complaints that coincidentally came right after the lawsuit was filed. Jennifer Ross tried to argue that Patricia was simply acting in her capacity as HOA president to protect community interests. But Judge Carver wasn't buying it. Miss Ross, I'm looking at a certified survey that clearly shows this barn 40 feet inside Mr. Sheffield's property line. I'm looking at meeting minutes showing the HOA board voted to drop all claims to this property. And I'm looking at evidence of repeated trespass after Mr. Sheffield made it clear Mrs. Hartwell was not welcome on his property. What community interest is being protected here? Jennifer Ross struggled to answer. Your Honor, there's a history of community use of this structure. Where's the evidence of that? Judge Carver interrupted. I see claims but no evidence. No photographs, no testimony from other residents saying they used this barn, nothing. What I do see is evidence of harassment. Derek presented the information about Brian Hartwell's property management company. Your Honor, we believe Mrs. Hartwell may have had a financial motive for trying to claim this barn as HOA property. Her husband owns a company that specializes in managing HOA amenities, including storage rental services. If she could designate this barn as HOA property, her husband's company could potentially profit from managing it. Judge Carver looked at Patricia, who had gone pale. Mrs. Hartwell, is this true? Does your husband own a property management company? Patricia stood up. Yes, but that has nothing to do with this. I was acting in good faith for the community. Good faith would have involved verifying property ownership before attempting to take possession of a structure. Good faith would have meant accepting the board's decision when they voted to drop this matter. Mrs. Hartwell, your behavior as described here is troubling. Judge Carver ruled in our favor, granting a temporary restraining order that prohibited Patricia from coming onto my property or contacting me directly. She also ordered Patricia to pay my legal fees related to the injunction hearing, which amounted to about $8,000. As we left the courthouse, Patricia and her attorney were having a heated conversation in the hallway. I heard Jennifer Ross say something about how she couldn't defend actions that had no legal basis. Derek put a hand on my shoulder. This is a good ruling, Lucas. But remember, it's a temporary order. We have another hearing in 30 days to make it permanent. In the meantime, Patricia is going to be very angry. Don't let your guard down. He was right about Patricia being angry. That evening, I received an email from her, sent to my address that she had from HOA records. It was rambling and emotional, accusing me of ruining her reputation and sabotaging her work for the community. She claimed I had turned the board against her, and that I was the one harassing her by pursuing legal action. The email ended with a threat. You'll regret making an enemy of me. I have more power in this community than you realize. I forwarded the email to Derek and to Detective Warner. Derek immediately filed it with the court as evidence of Patricia violating the spirit of the restraining order, which prohibited contact. Detective Warner called me to discuss it. Mr. Sheffield, this email concerns me. The phrasing "you'll regret" can be interpreted as a threat. I'm going to go have another conversation with Mrs. Hartwell. She needs to understand that her behavior is crossing legal lines. That conversation must have gone poorly because the next day, Patricia's husband Brian showed up at my property. I was in the house when I got a motion alert from my cameras. I looked at my phone and saw a man I recognized from photos as Brian Hartwell walking toward my barn. I went outside immediately. Mr. Hartwell, you're trespassing. Leave now. Brian was in his 50s, with graying hair and the build of someone who spent more time behind a desk than in the gym. He stopped but didn't leave. Mr. Sheffield, I'm here to talk man to man. This situation with my wife has gotten out of control. Can we just have a conversation and try to resolve this reasonably? There's nothing to resolve. The barn is on my property. The court agreed. Your wife needs to accept that and move on. She's just trying to do her job as HOA president. She takes her responsibilities seriously. She tried to steal my property. That's not taking responsibilities seriously. That's breaking the law. Brian's expression hardened. You're destroying her reputation over a misunderstanding. She made a mistake about the property line, that's all. Does she really deserve to be dragged through court for that? A mistake would have been making an inquiry and backing off when corrected. Your wife showed up with moving trucks, tried to fine me thousands of dollars, trespassed repeatedly, and has been harassing me for months. That's not a mistake, that's a pattern of behavior. You filed a lawsuit asking for damages. You're trying to bankrupt us. I filed for an injunction to stop the harassment. The damages are just to cover my legal fees and the money I've had to spend defending my property rights. If your wife had left me alone when I first showed her the deed, none of this would have happened. Brian stepped closer and his voice dropped. You need to drop this lawsuit. Patricia made mistakes, fine, but you're taking it too far. If you don't back off, you're going to regret it. That was the second threat in 2 days. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of him. Mr. Hartwell, you're trespassing and you just threatened me. Leave my property now or I'm calling the police. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked back to his car. As soon as he left, I called Detective Warner and reported the incident, sending her the video footage from my cameras. She sighed when I finished explaining. The Hartwells seemed determined to make this worse for themselves. I'm going to talk to the DA's office about the threats. This is starting to look like stalking and criminal harassment. Do you think they'll actually charge them? That depends on what else happens. Right now, we have the email and the verbal threat, both documented. If there's another incident, especially anything physical or another attempt to access your property, we'll likely pursue charges. The next incident came 2 days later, but it wasn't Patricia or Brian who showed up. It was the attempted break-in crew again, except this time my cameras got much better footage. It was around midnight when my motion alerts went off. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera feed. 2 men were back at the barn, and this time they had tools. They were actively trying to pry open the side door of the barn. I called 911 immediately, reporting a burglary in progress. Then I turned on all my exterior lights, which lit up the area around the barn like a football stadium. The 2 men looked directly at the cameras, and I got clear shots of their faces before they ran. 2 sheriff's deputies arrived within minutes. Deputy Morrison wasn't on shift, but the deputies who responded were just as professional. They took my statement and reviewed the footage on their patrol car computer. One of the deputies recognized one of the men. I know this guy. That's Tyler Hartwell. He's Brian Hartwell's nephew, works for his uncle's property management company. My stomach dropped. The HOA president's nephew. Yeah, and I don't recognize the other guy, but we'll figure out who he is. This is breaking and entering, attempted burglary, criminal mischief. These guys are looking at serious charges. The deputies put out a call for Tyler Hartwell, and he was picked up at his apartment about an hour later. The other man turned out to be a friend of his named Marcus Webb, who was also picked up that same night. Detective Warner called me the next morning. Mr. Sheffield, we've got both suspects in custody. Tyler Hartwell is claiming he was just checking on the property for his Aunt Patricia. He says she told him that the barn was HOA property and that there had been reports of damage, so she asked him to check it out. At midnight, with pry bars. That's what I said. His story doesn't hold up. Marcus Webb is telling a different story. He says Tyler told him they were breaking into an old barn to steal tools to sell. Either way, they're both being charged with attempted burglary. The question is whether Patricia or Brian Hartwell put them up to it. Tyler's blaming Patricia. He says she asked him to check on the property. He claims he didn't know he was doing anything wrong. But here's the thing, we pulled phone records, and there are multiple calls between Patricia's phone and Tyler's phone over the past week, including one the evening before this attempted break-in. That's not a coincidence. No, it's not. I'm going to interview Patricia today. Depending on what she says, this could expand into conspiracy charges. Patricia Hartwell was arrested that afternoon and charged with conspiracy to commit burglary, criminal mischief, and stalking. Brian Hartwell was brought in for questioning but released without charges, though Detective Warner told me they were still investigating his involvement, particularly regarding the threatening visit to my property. The arrest made the local news. HOA president arrested in property dispute was the headline in the Bend Bulletin. The story detailed the ongoing dispute over my barn and Patricia's escalating actions. Within hours, it had spread to social media, and the Hidden Valley Estates Facebook group exploded with activity. Some residents defended Patricia, claiming this was all a misunderstanding and that I was overreacting. But many more residents, including people I had never spoken to, came forward with their own stories of Patricia's bullying and overreach. The fence dispute, the shed dispute, excessive fines for minor violations, threats of liens, it all came pouring out. Sandra Wilson posted a message to the group. As a member of the HOA board, I want to assure all residents that we are taking this situation seriously. An emergency board meeting will be held tomorrow night to discuss leadership changes. All residents are welcome to attend. The emergency meeting was standing room only, with over 50 homeowners showing up either in person or via Zoom. Margaret Kowalski chaired the meeting since Patricia was obviously absent. The board voted unanimously to remove Patricia Hartwell as president and from the board entirely, citing breach of fiduciary duty and actions that brought liability to the HOA. They also voted to rescind all fines Patricia had issued over the past 6 months and to conduct an audit of her decisions as president. Margaret was appointed interim president until a special election could be held. During the public comment portion, Gerald Martinez stood up. I want to make a motion that we amend our bylaws to require board approval for any legal action, and to create an oversight committee to prevent any single board member from acting unilaterally. Patricia Hartwell abused her position, and we need safeguards to make sure it never happens again. The motion passed with overwhelming support from the residents present. I attended that meeting and spoke briefly during public comment, thanking the board members who had supported me and expressing hope that the HOA could move forward in a more transparent and fair manner. Several residents approached me afterward to apologize for what I had been through and to share their own frustrations with Patricia's leadership. Patricia's criminal case moved through the system over the next few months. She initially pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. The phone records, Tyler Hartwell's testimony after he took a plea deal, the documented history of harassment, it all painted a clear picture. Derek and I also discovered during the discovery process for the civil case that Patricia had been embezzling small amounts from the HOA budget to pay for her legal fees. She had been using HOA funds to pay Richard Fleming's firm without board approval, routing the payments through a discretionary account that she controlled. When the board conducted their audit, they found about $12,000 in unauthorized expenditures. The HOA filed additional criminal charges for embezzlement, and Brian Hartwell was also charged as an accessory. After it was discovered, he had helped Patricia hide the expenditures by creating false invoices through his property management company. In the end, Patricia Hartwell pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit burglary, stalking, and embezzlement. She was sentenced to 18 months in jail, with 12 months suspended, meaning she would serve 6 months. She was also ordered to pay restitution to me for my legal fees, property damage, and emotional distress, totaling $42,000. She had to pay back the HOA for the embezzled funds as well. Brian Hartwell pleaded guilty to accessory charges and received 2 years of probation and a $10,000 fine. Tyler Hartwell and Marcus Webb both took plea deals for attempted burglary and received probation and community service. The civil lawsuit settled out of court. Patricia and Brian's homeowner's insurance covered a significant portion of my damages, and they personally paid the rest. The total settlement was $65,000, which covered all my legal fees, the survey, the code enforcement issues, installation of the security system, and compensation for the months of stress and harassment. As part of the settlement, Patricia and Brian also agreed to move out of Hidden Valley Estates. They sold their house that spring and relocated to Redmond, about 20 miles away. The HOA underwent significant changes after Patricia's removal. Margaret served as president for a year before stepping down, and a new president, Donald Turner, was elected. He was a retired accountant who ran on a platform of transparency and limited HOA interference in homeowners' lives. The board reduced the number of rules and focused on genuine community needs like maintaining common areas and organizing neighborhood events. Sandra Wilson reached out to me several times during the transition, keeping me informed of changes and asking for my input on new policies. The HOA officially acknowledged in writing that my barn was private property and apologized for the actions of the previous administration. As for me, I finally got to enjoy my barn in peace. I finished the bookshelf I had been working on when all of this started, and I took on several other woodworking projects. I even built a small deck on the side of the barn where I could sit and drink coffee on weekend mornings. I also got a dog, a 3-year-old German Shepherd rescue named Duke. He was great company and an excellent security system. Not that I needed one anymore, but it was nice to have the companionship. Looking back, the whole ordeal lasted about 7 months from start to finish. From the day Patricia showed up with moving trucks to the day she was sentenced. It was one of the most stressful periods of my life, but it taught me a lot about standing up for yourself and not backing down when you know you're right. I also learned that HOAs can be wonderful or terrible depending on who's running them. The same organization that tried to steal my property under Patricia's leadership became reasonable and functional under new management. It wasn't the system itself that was the problem. It was the person abusing the system. Gerald Martinez became a good friend, and we'd meet for coffee every couple of weeks to discuss neighborhood politics and swap stories about property disputes. He always ended our conversations the same way. "Lucas, you did what I should have done. You didn't just fight them, you fought them all the way. You probably saved other homeowners from going through what we went through." Maybe he was right. After Patricia's arrest and the publicity around the case, I heard from several people in other neighborhoods who were dealing with similar HOA overreach. Some of them used my case as a template for fighting back against their own bullies. A few even hired Derek to represent them. Derek, for his part, developed something of a specialty in HOA litigation. He joked that I had made him the go-to guy for HOA nightmares in Central Oregon. He was busier than ever, but he seemed to enjoy the work. He told me once that there was something particularly satisfying about standing up to petty tyrants who thought a clipboard and a title gave them unlimited power. As for the barn, it remained exactly what it always was: my private property, my workshop, my sanctuary. I added a sign on the door that read "Sheffield's Workshop, Private Property, no HOA access required or desired." It was petty, but it made me smile every time I saw it. The property survey Robert Kim had conducted was framed and hanging in my workshop. That certified document showing the barn 42 feet and 7 inches from the property line was more than just a legal record. It was a reminder that truth matters, that documentation matters, and that sometimes you have to fight for what's rightfully yours. I never regretted standing my ground. It would have been easier to let Patricia use the barn, to avoid the conflict, to just go along with her demands. But giving in to a bully never makes things better. It just teaches them that bullying works. The Hidden Valley Estates community recovered from the scandal. Property values didn't drop, despite some worries that the negative publicity would hurt the neighborhood's reputation. If anything, the changes in HOA leadership made the neighborhood more attractive. People wanted to live in a place where the HOA was reasonable and functional, not a dictatorship. I stayed in my house and on my 5 acres, continuing to enjoy the property I had worked hard to buy and maintain. The barn remained my favorite part of the property, a heated and comfortable space where I could work on projects, store my tools, and occasionally just sit and think. And every winter, when the temperature dropped and snow covered the ground, I'd sit in my heated barn with a cup of coffee and Duke at my feet, warm and content in the knowledge that this space was mine. No HOA president with delusions of grandeur, no fake property maps, no intimidation tactics could change that simple fact. The barn was 42 feet and 7 inches inside my property line, and it always had been. That distance, precisely measured and legally documented, represented more than just physical space. It represented the importance of facts over fiction, rights over entitlement, and persistence over bullying. Patricia Hartwell learned that lesson the hard way, and her 6 months in jail gave her plenty of time to think about it.